Hey, it's Jerry Norton, and I was recently asked to give a presentation virtually at the InvestorFuel Summit in Texas. I was asked to talk about my projections and where I think the wholesale industry is heading going into 2026 and beyond. So I identified 10 threats to the industry and the solutions to those threats so that you and I can adapt now and be ready for those big changes. All right, let's cut to the training. You know, this year and the last few years have been quite transformational in wholesale real estate. I'm going to focus the rest of my presentation, everything I want to talk about with you guys today, specifically on wholesaling and really some massive change that is happening in the wholesale industry. But I think that in this next year, we're going to see a real falling out, if you will. And I think we're going to see a lot of changes that are going to transpire that are going to either some are going to adapt, and those that do adapt, wholesaling is going to get a whole lot better for them. There's going to be less competition and there's going to be more profit. And for those that don't, if you're clinging to the old way of doing it, you're going to be unable to compete and you're going to be weeded out. And so I want to really talk about why this is. And I've identified what I call 10 threats we're facing as wholesaling, as a wholesaling industry. And I'm generalizing here with the entire industry. Some of this is going to be more market specific than maybe other markets, but this is the trend. The things I'm sharing are the things that I'm seeing happen at an accelerated pace. And then I'm going to share what I believe are 10 shifts or changes to make to offset those threats. If you're thinking about business, we always want to be one step ahead of the game. My goal is always anticipate what's coming and then be ready for it and be able to adapt quickly. I don't want to be behind the ball trying to catch up when things happen. I'd rather be proactive and be ready for it. The people that make the most money in business and in real estate are the ones that can anticipate those changes and then be ready for them and are quick to shift and quick to adapt. So that's my hope here, is that I can give you some of these ideas. Look at this as an opportunity to preemptively get ready for these things and be at one step ahead. So let's go into this. The first threat that wholesaling is facing is a very negative perception in the marketplace. You know, within the inside wholesale industry, we think we're wonderful. We think we're great. We think we solve problems. We think everybody loves us. We think that the world wouldn't revolve if it wasn't for us. And I happen to believe those things. But outside of the wholesale industry, wholesaling is predatory. We're starting to see a lot of language called equity theft or deed stripping. And there's this idea that distressed sellers are a protected class. And we're seeing a lot of consumer protection agencies and we're seeing a lot of regulatory bodies that are adopting these ideas. And they're pushing this narrative. And I see this all the time. As a prominent wholesale educator, I'm constantly bombarded from real estate agents and even other people in real estate investing, and certainly outside of what we do that adapt these ideas. And in particular, right now, some of the hot buttons are foreclosure, anything foreclosure, pre-foreclosure, foreclosure, and elderly, of course. And so what I mean by hot button is these are very sensitive areas, and you need to be very careful with what you're doing and how you're interacting in those scenarios. What's maybe a solution to this? One of the solutions that I think is very important is to over-disclose. I've adopted 2 disclosures that are in my contracts. And by the way, guys, if you want these, I'll give these to you for free. I'll give you a link where you can download these disclosures and you can either add them to your contracts or add them as addendums. But the first one is what I call an equity release disclosure. And I want to verbally and in writing have this conversation with every seller that I interact with. You make that seller aware and they acknowledge that the purchase price may be less than market value and that the seller knowingly and voluntarily agrees to sell the property for convenience, to save time and or money, lack of funds, to renovate and or any other personal reasons, and releases and waives any and all claims against existing or future equity arising from the property. Now, what is that saying there? You're disclosing and you're making it very clear, and the seller's acknowledging that they're selling at a discount. And they're doing that intentionally, knowingly. There is no misunderstanding that you're somehow buying at a discount to their detriment. This is the language we need to now talk about. We need to be very clear about. We need to make sure sellers understand this so that nobody can come back on you and say, you stole that property from somebody. You stole their equity. the second one is what I call a profit disclosure. And this is really simple. The seller acknowledges that you are an investor. And as such, your intent is to make a profit by either renting, flipping the property, or assigning the contract. So there's no qualms about who you are, what you do, why you're buying this property. It's upfront, it's in writing, and it's very clear to everybody. Now, you may be thinking, well, Jerry, this is sort of self-explanatory. It's not, and don't assume it is, because these are things that could come back and create a problem with you, with regulators, and with consumer protection agencies. And we're starting to see this quite a bit. So you want to really step up your game and talk about some of this and over-disclose. Okay, second threat is there's an attack on equitable interest. And equitable interest is your contractual rights protected by the Constitution, in theory, I guess, because it's not really what's playing out right now. And when I say equitable interest, I want to make this very clear to everybody what equitable interest is. It's you making money in a transaction before you legally own the property. That's a broad definition of equitable interest, and that is under attack. And that includes the assignment, obviously, because you're selling your contract before you own the property. That also includes a double close. Now, double closings used to be the workaround when they come after the assignment. They'll close that loophole, and we're starting to see that happen, and we'll continue to see that happen. Now, why is a double close equitable interest? Well, it's your BC contract. In a double closing scenario, your BC contract is before you own the property. So that's equitable interest that allows you to do that. And clearly a novation is also equitable interest because you're trading one contract for another contract before you actually own the property. So the end game with regulation, guys, if you don't see the writing on the wall, or if you're not attuned to this, you need to wake up. That's under attack. And a day is coming very shortly where using equitable interest will either become unfeasible, meaning it's not really a good viable strategy anymore because it's so difficult to do, or they'll take it away entirely, which we're seeing both of those things happening. Now, what's the solution? Well, the solution is you need to get capitalized, is how I refer to this. And you need to start what I call taking down deals. You may recognize this as a wholetailing, been around forever. I've been recoining it or redefining it as the takedown method. And this is basically where you're going to buy the property without a predetermined buyer. Okay, it's not a double close. You don't contract with the new buyer until after you actually legally own the property. So these are more like 60, 90-day turns, not same day, next day closings. But it's still wholesaling in the sense that you're not renovating. Okay, maybe a trash out, maybe a clean out. But the idea here is you're going to fund it, you're going to buy it, and then you're going to put it back up on the market publicly for sale and resell it to an end buyer. I call this the takedown method, and I think this is the future of wholesaling. I think eventually this will be how we wholesale. It'll be like the car industry. You know, you go into CarMax, and CarMax buys your car at a discount. Why? For speed and convenience. You walk out of there with cash. Now, they don't flip your contract. They buy at a discount, 80 cents on the dollar, and then they turn around and sell it at market value. That's how the car industry does wholesaling. That's how pretty much every industry does wholesaling. Real estate will eventually adopt the same model. You'll have to have capital, you'll have to buy it at a discount, and then you'll resell it to end buyers. So what does that mean? It means maybe you can continue to do assignments and double closes and novations in your market, but you're one policy away from it not being allowed anymore. And if you don't think there's regulation coming, there is either a bill in progress or one coming in your state. And in states that already have it, they're tightening it up even more. Oklahoma just did round 2 on their regulation, and they're tightening up the rules. And so smart wholesalers right now are getting capitalized. And in areas like South Carolina, where wholesaling now is almost impossible, the wholesalers there that can buy the properties and have funding are killing it. They're buying deeper discounts. They're making more money. And just to put this in perspective, by the way, guys, on my takedown deals that I do, and if you do it right, we make 2 to 4 times more than assignments anyways. You know, there's more profit in it, more risk because you're funding it, buying it, taking title, and it takes a little longer, 60, 90-day turns, maybe 120 days, but you're making a whole lot more money when you do takedown. Why? Because you're not relying on a local investor group, a cash buyer list, buyers on Facebook or on platforms like InvestorLift. You're getting on the MLS, which means you're getting maximum exposure to the market, and you're finding the highest paying buyer in the market. Okay, so threat number 3 is the National Association of Realtors is attacking off-market real estate. This is a direct attack on off-market, and NAR's endgame is that private transactions are no longer allowed, that you have to have real estate agent representation on all deals. The push is that wholesaling is brokering and requires licensing. Where is this happening? Well, there are lots of states now that have a regulation that either to market a contract or to just do the assignment at all requires a real estate license. Now, even though that license has nothing to do with wholesaling, you got to have a license. You got to hang that license and keep it active with a broker, and it's all about the money. NAR wants their dues, brokers want a piece of the action, and it's all meant to feed NAR's directive to have everybody licensed that does real estate. And just to show you how scary this is, if you guys don't know this, Washington State passed a law, and here's what the law says in essence. If there's no agent involved, it's direct to seller. You have to disclose in writing to the seller that they have the right to an appraisal that you, the buyer, pay for. So you have to pay a $500 appraisal for that seller. Seller gets to choose the appraiser. You have to pay for it. And then the seller has the right to cancel the contract when the appraisal comes back. Now, what wholesaler in their right mind is going to be paying for appraisals so the seller can shop you and cancel your contract? It's not really a model anymore. Like, that would be the dumbest thing ever to do. Now, there's one exception to that rule. You don't have to do that if either seller or buyer has agent representation on the transaction. So essentially, there is no more off-market real estate in Washington State. There has to be agent representation on one party or the other. So what does that mean? The solution is real easy. If you're transacting in Washington, get your real estate license and self-represent. Doesn't say you can't self-represent. So now every wholesaler that wants to wholesale in Washington State has to now have a real estate license. They found a way to make everybody get licensed. By the way, this has nothing to do with wholesaling. It's just transacting off-market with sellers. If you're a flipper, if you're a buy and hold investor, and you're transacting directly with sellers, this applies to you now. This is like an everybody thing now in Washington State. And this isn't a bill. This passed. This is law in Washington State. So we're going to see more of that. North Carolina has a bill in place right now, very similar. Sellers can cancel contracts. The state of Pennsylvania, sellers can cancel contracts. If you have a real estate license and you're transacting as a wholesaler, make sure that you have agency disclosure in all your contracts. And it needs to say something to the effect of, you want the seller to acknowledge that you hold an active real estate license, but you are not representing the seller in any way and acting in your own interest. Licensing and investing don't mix together. You have to wear one hat or the other. You're either an agent representing seller or buyer, or you're an investor representing yourself. And if you blur those lines is where you can get in trouble with your license. So it just means you have to have really good disclosure. You have to make sure sellers know what hat you're wearing. And we list a lot of properties. I'll get to that in a minute. So if I'm going to list a property for a seller, then I'm going to put that hat on, and now I'm representing the seller and getting them the highest price the market will pay. If I'm licensed but representing myself as an investor, not a licensed agent, then I got to take that hat off. I got to put my investor hat on, and I got to make sure that seller knows I'm not representing you as an agent. I'm representing my own best interest as an investor. Keep moving on here. Threat number 4 is there is an attack on outbound marketing. There's this idea around solicitations, or what they call intrusive marketing. Atlanta passed a law a couple years ago. They call it commercial harassment. If you contact a seller through any means, door knocking, direct mail, cold calling, whatever, and the seller says, no, I'm not interested in selling you my house, you cannot contact that seller again for 6 months. If you contact them again within 6 months, then there's fines and penalties and so on for doing that. So it's protecting sellers from your harassment about selling their property. Texas now, I've been covering this recently. This is a new thing in Texas. Texas really upped the game on cold calling and texting. And now that is considered solicitations, and there's a bunch of strict rules around doing that in Texas. You got to pay a registration fee. You got to get a bond. You got to have opt-out things. You got to follow a bunch of rules in order to cold call and text. And the fines are massive. The biggest change they made to Texas, this law, it's called SB 140. They put the enforcement in the hands of the litigators. So now it's $5,000 per occurrence. It's going to be now real tricky in Texas to cold call and text. But that movement, we're seeing a lot of that. So what's the solution? I mean, really, it's to move to inbound marketing. Inbound marketing solves all your problems anyway, because now it's intent-based marketing. And this would be TV, radio, direct mail, maybe. It would be pay-per-click with Google ads. It'd be maybe PPL providers. It would be inbound marketing where the consumer is reaching out to you, not you reaching out to the consumer or to the homeowner. Now, this is expensive and this creates a lot of other problems. I'll talk about those in a second here. This is where all wholesalers want to be anyway. You really want to move to this direction anyway. The challenge with this is it's making the game a lot harder for new investors, new wholesalers. The barrier to entry is getting harder now. All of this actually is making that harder, but this is one more thing that's making it harder. Cold calling's cheap. That's why we do it. It's really cheap. Takes a lot more calls, takes a lot longer, and you have a lot smaller assignment fees or wholesale fees, but it's so cheap to do that it becomes a very viable strategy for newer investors. We're going to start to see that go away. We're going to start to see that becoming harder and harder. Okay, threat number 5 is an attack on virtual wholesaling. All of this, it's making it more difficult to cross state lines because now it's like keeping track of all of this. I mean, I maintain a report. You can get it for free. It's called wholesaleregulations.com. And I track all of these regulations by state. And it's hard to keep it all straight. If you're a virtual wholesaler, especially if you're nationwide, you better be paying real close attention to what these regulations are because the laws apply where you transact, not where you live. Doesn't matter where you're at, it matters where the deal is. And so you better be paying close attention to what some of these rules are so you don't get yourself into trouble. And I think what we're going to see here is we're going to see multi-market or virtual wholesaling get more difficult. Now, I'm going to piggyback this. Before I give the solution to this one, I'm going to combine this with threat number 6, which is an attack on phone closing. What I mean by that is it's getting harder and harder, and it's going to continue to get harder to close deals on the phone. And I think it's due to a lack of trust. I think this is AI-driven, a lot of this, is are you real? Are you a real person? And can I trust you? I'm talking to you on the phone here, but I don't know you. I can't see you. You're out of state or you're from somewhere else, and I don't trust you. And so it's getting harder and harder for sellers to trust wholesalers on the phone. I think we're going to continue to see that trend. So if you piggyback both of these, threat number 5, which is crossing state lines, along with it getting harder to close on the phones, the solution is to close in person. Now, I personally made this transition a couple years ago because I saw this writing on the wall. Now, I still close on the phone for education purposes and a few other reasons. But for the most part, my main wholesale businesses, we now do an appointment model. We close in person. We switched. So when we get a lead, ideally inbound, we don't try to do a one-call close on the phone. We actually are jumping in the car and we're driving to that house and we're meeting that seller in person as fast as we possibly can. And we're going to walk that property. We're going to sit down at the kitchen table. We're going to be eyeball to eyeball and belly to belly. We're going to let that seller cry on our shoulder. We're going to build rapport. We're going to create trust. And we're going to throw every other wholesaler under the bus and we're going to walk out of there with a contract. I mean, I'll beat every wholesaler out there in person because it's just so much better. You can build trust so much more effectively than you can on the phone. And so I think what's going to happen is we're going to be switching from virtual to in person. If you're not doing that already, if you start doing it, you'll see a massive change in your business. Your close ratios will go up. Your fees will get better just by closing in person. Now, doesn't mean you, the wholesaler, have to close in person, but you better have an acquisitions person on the ground going on appointment. Okay, threat number 7 is the commoditization. Wholesaling's morphed now into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Everybody knows about it, and a cash offer is now a commodity. Everybody has a cash offer, and there's nothing special about it anymore. You don't stand out anymore. And how can you differentiate from everybody else? One is to not wholesale. Don't be a wholesaler. Say, I'm not a wholesaler, I'm the buyer. And this is going back to that takedown method where you're actually going to purchase the property. When you can sit down on appointment, eyeball to eyeball, belly to belly with a seller, and you can say to that seller, hey, those other offers you got, those are wholesalers. They're not actual buyers. Let me explain it to you. If they can't find a buyer, guess what they're going to do? They're going to back out of the contract. That's why they have these contingencies. Now we can waive contingencies. We can put down bigger earnest money. We can make it non-refundable. We can close faster. We can show proof of funds. Why? Because we're capitalized and we can buy the dang thing. And we're going to beat everybody else because we can actually buy it. Don't be a wholesaler. Say, I'm not a wholesaler, I'm the buyer. That's one method to differentiate. The second method is you got to really go full service. You got to offer so many more solutions to sellers. You got to be willing to do packing, moving, put their stuff in storage. You got to be able to find them a new property that they can move into. You got to give them post-occupancy. We're now releasing cash early. Never thought I would do that. We're giving people money early. Now we're going to make sure title's clear, but we're doing things above and beyond to help sellers by providing more of a full service operation. Threat number 8, we're going to see a higher cost per contract. And this goes back to inbound marketing. We're seeing now a increase in marketing expense. So we got to get ready for this. I mean, we got to be prepared for this. Some markets that are really competitive like Phoenix, I think they're at $10,000 to $15,000 cost per contract. Imagine that. You're spending $15,000 just to get to a contract. Well, that thing better make $25,000 or $30,000 or you're not making money. And so one of the solutions to offset that higher cost per contract is going to be exit strategies. You got to have more exit strategies. If you're a one-trick pony and all you do is the assignment, then you are one policy away from being out of business. And really, there are only 4. One is a low cash offer. You're buying it at a deep discount. You're buying it at the bottom price you possibly can. The second solution is a novation. You're going to be able to pay more for that. That's only a very specific type of seller where novation even applies. The third one is creative finance. If the seller's willing to wait to get some or all of their money and you can buy on terms, either subject to or seller finance, you have a solution for that type of seller. And the fourth solution, if they want retail and you're licensed, is list the property. We list for 3% all the time. They won't take low cash, novation, or creative, and they want full retail. Why don't we list this property for you? We'll get the highest price the market can pay. And then we put that agent hat on and we list properties for sellers. Why throw that lead away? Most wholesalers throw those leads away, not motivated, not going to do anything for this person, not my avatar, and they walk from those leads. We don't. We list them. Why? I got this far. I'm on the phone. I spent the money on the marketing. Why would I throw that lead away? I'm going to list it and make 3%. Having multiple exit strategies, learning how to do and be able to do all 4 of these means that you can maximize your marketing dollars. You know, instead of contracting 1 in 15 or 1 in 20 or whatever, you can get down to 1 in 10, 1 in 8. So you're stretching out your marketing dollars by being able to have multiple strategies. Threat number 9 is ChatGPT is going to replace Google. Now, what happens when people stop using Google and they go to ChatGPT to find things? I'll give you an example where I just did this. I've got somebody that I'm suing in Montana on my lake property. And so I needed a lawyer that specialized in a very specific skill. So what did I do? I did not go to Google and say real estate attorneys in my area. I went to ChatGPT and I said to ChatGPT, I said the following. I said, give me the top 5 lawyers in this area that specialize in this specific type of real estate law. ChatGPT spit out 5 referrals. Now, where did ChatGPT get those 5 referrals? It searched and it found the top 5 lawyers, not the top best lawyers, the top 5 lawyers that have a market presence that came up in the search. What if a seller says, ChatGPT, give me the top 5 cash buyers in Tulsa, Oklahoma? ChatGPT is basically going to be pulling SEO, search engine optimization. The wholesalers that have a local presence are going to be the ones that get all the deals when that transition fully happens. What's the focus here? What's the solution? You're going to need to become what I call a local market expert. You're going to need to build a brand presence in your market. You're going to need to have a website, testimonials, reviews, and so on. You're going to need to pop up in the searches. When someone goes to ChatGPT, ChatGPT needs to recognize you as a local market expert. So that's going to be a lot of effort and emphasis on building that brand presence. Threat number 10 now, sellers are becoming more savvy because of AI. They're going to price check ARVs. They're going to be doing script objections and combating some of the things you say. They're going to know what you're doing, know what you're saying, know where you're coming from. They're going to be able to get rehab estimates with AI. AI is creating a much savvier seller that's going to be more empowered. What does that mean for you? It means you better be doing the same thing. You better be more data-driven in your closing approach. Sloppy offers are going to get annihilated. You better know comps. You better have a clear repair scope. You better have a proof of performance. You better be able to stand behind what you're saying and doing because sellers are going to be more empowered. Bonus threat number 11 is burnout. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of burnout in wholesale real estate. This like hand-to-mouth deal chasing, it's going to burn out a lot of wholesalers. It's too high production. It's too high speed. These are wholesalers that are solo operators running around transacting like a madman. No calendar, no automation, poor processes, and it's going to catch up to you and it's going to be the death of you. You've got to really dial in now. The solution would be Systems, systems, systems. You got to get your processes really working in your favor. You got to know your KPIs. You know, how many leads to opportunities, opportunities to appointments, appointments to contracts, and contracts to closings. You got to know those numbers meticulously. You got to know your cost per contract, your cost per deal, and how to allocate your budgets and so on. You got to treat this basically like a real business. You can't fly by the seat of your pants anymore and think you can run a successful wholesale operation. So guys, in a nutshell, if I'm honest with you guys, I'm actually really, really excited for 2026 and beyond. I'm excited to embrace this change. I'm excited to take this to a new level. And one of the things that I'm doing, one of the big moves that I'm trying to make for the industry, especially with education, is I'm working on creating a fund that will do 100% funding for takedown deals. I want to be able to provide that solution because I think it's coming, and I think it's going to be the next big need in the industry, is being able to provide for wholesalers the ability to buy the property, funded 100%. That product is not really available in the marketplace right now, and I want to bring that to market so that wholesalers that aren't capitalized can now start to do these deals at a much higher level. I can provide a pilot program we're doing for funding, where if you've got deals and you want to see if you can get 100% funding, you can check that out. And I just want to be a resource for everybody. Anything else I can do for you and help you, let me know.